Hello, welcome back to Finish Faithful. My name's Jeff, and today we'll be covering the last chapters of the book of Daniel. In the last 3 episodes, we've covered chapter 2, chapter 7, and chapter 8, and we'll go through some of the things that the last chapters say in this episode. The Bible has a plot. Daniel makes that clearer than almost anything that's gone before. The plot starts, God creates the heavens and the earth and makes man in his image and gives man the dominion. And then man falls and Satan seems to gain the dominion that man was supposed to have. God declares there will be a redemption and a restoration in Genesis 3:15. And then as generations progress, it becomes known that God's plan to restore the world will come through Abraham. He makes that covenant with Abraham and gives him and his descendants the land of Israel and says, through your seed, all nations will be blessed. And then that covenant passes through Isaac and not Ishmael, and then through Jacob. Eventually we see that the Messiah is promised as coming through David, and then through the line of Solomon after David. And always all the prophets are talking about the day of the Lord, which is this time that will come in conjunction with the restoration, where God will judge and punish evil and vindicate the righteous, and the righteous will inherit this kingdom in the restored earth. And Messiah comes to be progressively revealed in this revelation that Messiah is coming and he will reign over all nations in this restored earth. And then eventually, after the 1,000-year kingdom, the last 2 chapters of the book of Revelation tells us that he turns over the kingdom to God. There's a new heaven and new earth. Daniel really gets the revelation of the conclusion of the history of Israel. And when they are restored, the world is restored. When Israel's Messiah reigns, we, the church, reign with him. It's an interwoven story between the church and Israel. And this is the fulfillment of the plan since the fall. That's really the whole plot of the Bible. Let's go to chapter 9 and review again verses 24 through the end of the chapter that we actually spent the first several episodes of Finish Faithful covering in more detail. But let's remind ourselves of those important prophecies. We're reading from the NIV here instead of the ESV that we usually read from, because I just like the way it reads here in this section. I think it makes it easy to say and easy to understand. 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to, number 1, finish transgression, 2, put an end to sin, 3, to atone for wickedness, 4, bring in everlasting righteousness, 5, to seal up vision and prophecy, and 6, to anoint the most holy place. Let's stop and cover those numbers. Obviously, some of them are yet future. Transgression isn't over yet. There hasn't been an end to sin yet. Wickedness has been atoned for on the cross by Jesus Christ, but it has not yet brought in everlasting righteousness. But when Messiah's kingdom comes and he's reigning on earth, that will seal up vision and prophecy. There won't be any more need for vision and prophecy because we'll have the Son of God ruling over the earth. And to anoint the most holy place, there will be a temple in Jerusalem, and this temple is a holy thing in heaven now and on earth when it's rebuilt. and in the millennial kingdom, it will be a holy place. Continuing on, know and understand this: from the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 70 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. Verse 26, after 62 sevens, so we had the 7 sevens in the previous verse where they're rebuilding the temple, plus 62 sevens equals 69 sevens or 69 weeks. And that historically, depending on how you calculate when the word went out to restore and build Jerusalem, puts you at about exactly 29 AD, about exactly the time when Jesus Christ was crucified. And so after these 69 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and have nothing. That's the crucifixion. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue to the end. Desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. The Antichrist makes or confirms a covenant at the beginning of the 70th week. In the middle of the 70th week, he will put an end to sacrifice and offerings, and at the temple he will set up the abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Of course, Messiah comes back and at the Battle of Armageddon totally triumphs over the Antichrist. But a couple of important points to remind ourselves of is that this 70th week, there's a gap between the 69th and the 70th week because Messiah is cut off at the end of the 69th seven, and then Antichrist comes, and at the beginning of this 70th seven, the 70th week, he confirms a covenant with Israel, and that sets the clock ticking on that 70th week. And in the middle of that, he commits the abomination of desolation. Now, Jesus refers to the abomination of desolation clearly in Matthew 24 and in Mark, in the Olivet Discourse, where he says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, let the reader understand. So Jesus is confirming that this abomination of desolation is yet future at the coming of the end times, and that it is the middle of the 70th week. It refers back here because it's telling, go read Daniel and make sure you understand Daniel. So we will know it's like the signal flare going off at the middle of the 70th week when the abomination of desolation is committed by the Antichrist in the temple. We know that there's only half of the 70th week to go. There's only 42 months to go. Now let's look closely at this phrase, the people of the ruler who will come. Other translations call it the people of the prince who is to come. And I'm going to tell you the explanation that I learned from reading this book, The Mideast Beast by Joel Richardson. Here's Joel Richardson when I was on a tour of Israel with him. My wife and I were there, and here we are on the Mount of Olives, where Jesus gave the Olivet Discourse, looking back at Jerusalem and the temple area. And Joel's a godly man, and on his website, joelstrumpet.com, there's a lot of resources and teachings about the end times, which go way deeper than what I'm going. But his book, The Mideast Beast, can be downloaded in PDF version for free there, or maybe you can still buy a printed version. And this book documents very well from Scripture that the Antichrist will not lead some kind of revived Roman empire thing, but he will be leading a Mideast coalition of Israel's ancient enemies, and that the Antichrist, it'll be a Mideast beast, a Mideast empire. So Joel Richardson quotes this source, Tacitus, who is a Roman historian writing shortly after the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Titus Caesar found in Judea 3 legions, the 5th, the 10th, and the 15th. To these he added the 12th from Syria, and some of the men belonging to the 18th and the 3rd, whom he had withdrawn from Alexandria. This force was accompanied by a strong contingent of Arabs who hated the Jews with the usual hatred of neighbors. By this point in the Roman Empire, not all the legions of Rome were from Italy, from the area around Rome. The Roman Empire had been established for some time, and they're out recruiting from the provinces. So a lot of the Roman legions are made up not of people from Italy or from Rome. They're made up of people from Turkey, people from Egypt, people from Syria. And that was the makeup of these legions whom were under Titus in this destruction of Jerusalem. Here's another source, Josephus, in the War of the Jews. So Vespasian sent his son Titus. Titus later became Caesar, who came by land into Syria, where he gathered together the Roman forces with a considerable number of auxiliaries from the kings in that neighborhood. Malchus, also the king of Arabia, sent 1,000 horsemen besides 5,000 footmen, the greatest part of which were archers, so that the whole army, including auxiliaries sent by the king, as well as horsemen and footmen, when all were united together, amounted to 60,000. This is the record of Josephus. And apparently what happened is that Titus didn't really give the order to completely destroy the temple and Jerusalem. He just wanted to put down the rebellion in a very firm way. But these neighboring kings, the Arab neighbors who were the auxiliary forces, once they got in there, the bloodlust just took over, and they're the ones who totally destroyed Jerusalem and totally sacked it. And the point of all of this is that the people of the prince who is to come is not Roman. These people who destroyed Jerusalem are Middle Eastern people. Therefore, the prince who is to come would be a Middle Eastern prince over these areas. I'd like us to remind ourselves of Zechariah chapter 12, 1 through 3. The oracle of the word of the Lord concerning Israel. Thus declares the Lord, who stretched out the heavens and founded the earth and formed the spirit of man within him. Behold, I'm about to make Jerusalem a cup of staggering to all the surrounding people. The siege of Jerusalem will also be against Judah. On that day I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the people. All who lift it will surely hurt themselves, and all the nations of the earth will gather against it. This is obviously yet future, because in 70 AD, the people who went against Jerusalem didn't hurt themselves. They wiped out Jerusalem. But in the future, when the Antichrist brings together forces against Jerusalem, everyone who comes against Jerusalem, God will be against them. They will hurt themselves. So as we move toward the end of the age, we'll see a growing hatred of Israel, a growing hatred of Jerusalem. It already has an importance in the news far beyond what you would expect for a city of 500,000 people or so, without any particular importance, other than that it is the center of the world to the people of the book. That's a term that's used to describe the Muslims, the Christians and the Jews are the people of the book. In other words, they're people who respect the validity of the Bible. And now in our high schools and in our universities, it's blatantly taught that Israel is just terrible. What they've done to the Palestinians makes them some kind of criminal nation. We should boycott, disinvest, and sanction against Israel, the BDS movement, because of the Palestinians. And this kind of hostility and division over the issue of Israel and Jerusalem will grow and grow. People forget that the Holocaust happened. They were chased out of every nation they ever went to. They were persecuted. They tried to wipe them out. And the Holocaust took millions and millions of lives. And after that, they started to pour in as refugees into the homeland that God had sworn by a covenant to give to Israel forever. And amazingly enough, after 2,000 years almost, people came from all over. The Jewish nation came together and was in the land of Israel, and Israel was a country again. So now these things in the Bible that require Israel to be a country can now start unrolling and being fulfilled. So there's just tremendous polarization over this issue, and that will do nothing but increase. Well, let's go on now to chapter 10 of Daniel, verse 1. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel, who was called Belteshazzar. Its message was true, and it concerned a great war. The understanding of the message came to him in a vision. So Daniel is older now. He served under Nebuchadnezzar for almost 40 years, and then was Belshazzar, and then was Darius the Mede, and now is Cyrus. So Daniel is getting up there in years, and it's beautiful to read chapter 10, and we're going to skip over some of it, but you should read it on your own. It's beautiful how he's fasting and praying down at the river Tigris, and we'll see some of the heavenly interaction that comes in this vision that concerns a great war, and that is certainly true, it says. Going down to verse 10, and he, one of these heavenly beings, said to me, O Daniel, man greatly loved, understand the word that I speak to you, and stand upright, for now I have been sent to you. And when he had spoken this word to me, I stood up trembling, and he said, Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humble yourself before your God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. And behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. So Daniel had been fasting for 3 weeks, but from the first day, his prayer was heard and the wheels were set in motion. When we pray, things start to happen. And of course, we can't see what's going on in the heavenly realm, in the unseen realm, and what forces are at work for God to come and answer our prayer. But Daniel just had that persistence, that devotion, that holiness, that's such a wonderful way to pray, that we should seek to be like that. Verse 13, the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. Now this is an angelic being, a heavenly being talking, saying the prince of Persia withstood him for 21 days. Do you think that's the human prince of Persia that could withstand him for 21 days? I don't. It's clearly a heavenly being. And then it says, but Michael, one of your chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people, Israel, in the latter days, for the vision is for days yet to come. Then he said, do you know why I have come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side except Michael, your prince. Look at this glimpse of the kinds of things that are constantly going on between principalities and powers in heavenly places. Apparently, there's a way in which they're territorial, and that certain principalities and powers heavenly have jurisdiction over certain earthly areas. I don't really know, and I don't want to get speaking too far above my pay grade, but we do see that here, and it's interesting to keep in mind. And Daniel is thinking about very high-level stuff, praying about very high-level stuff about the future of Israel, coming out of captivity, God's chosen people, national affairs. So what he's thinking about very high-level stuff and praying about that, and the principalities and powers that deal with that are probably the upper echelon of the principalities and powers. But these are the kinds of things that are going on that we can't see. Now we're going to skip over some of the verses in Daniel chapter 11, but let me give you the gist of what's going on there. You have the king of the north and the king of the south battling back and forth. And it says that these are the split off of the king of Greece, Alexander, who was the initial conqueror. So when we look at this map that we've had before, the purple area is the Seleucid kingdom. That's the kingdom of the north here. And the yellow area going down into Egypt is the Ptolemaic kingdom, and that's the king of the south. So all this back and forth to us is just a little complicated and confusing. But concerning Israel at that time, as these armies are going back and forth fighting, they're marching through Israel, and this is tremendously relevant to the nation of Israel at that time in the intertestamental period between the end of the prophets and the time when John the Baptist came. There were no prophets writing, and Greek culture, Hellenization, was sinking in culturally. Do you think the rabbis and scribes were reading Daniel? I'll bet they were. I'll bet they were looking for the kingdom to come. I'll bet they were looking for Messiah. So if you're interested in finding out more of the specifics on this, there have been a lot of books, a lot of resources. Some of the ones that I've found easy to understand and helpful. There's a radio preacher, great man by the name of Dr. David Jeremiah, who has books on this. He has teaching series on this, and he goes through the detail of the king of the north and the king of the south and how that corresponds with history. Verse 21, in his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant, and from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. So one of the difficulties in Daniel chapter 11 is to see what happened in the past with the Seleucids versus the Ptolemaic kingdoms going back and forth, and what's speaking about Antichrist in the future. And the way a lot of biblical prophecy works, of course, is it's fulfilled in one sense in a shorter term historically, and has yet a greater fulfillment in the future in end times prophecy, and that could be going on here. So these verses we just read, contemptible person, flattery, prince of the covenant, alliance, all of these certainly seem like they could be applying to things we've already learned about the Antichrist in the future, but they also apply pretty well to Antiochus Epiphanes in the past. verse 24, without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province. He shall do what neither his fathers nor his fathers' fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time. And he, obviously the king of the north from the Seleucid area here, shall stir up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall wage war with an exceeding great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for plot shall be devised against him. So let's remind ourselves from the map here that we're being told that the Antichrist will come from this Seleucid area, the king of the north. And just look at the map. It's the Middle East, and that's the enemies of Israel now. Rome has nothing to do with this. Rome isn't on this map. They aren't a player in this. So the idea that the Antichrist and his confederacy in the future is some revival of the Roman Empire doesn't work with Daniel chapter 8, where the little horn comes out of the Seleucids, and it doesn't work with Daniel chapter 11 here, where he's a later version of the king of the north. Verse 31, forces from him, the king of the north, shall appear and profane the temple and fortresses, and he shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. And he shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. Well, this certainly applied under Antiochus Epiphanes and the Maccabean revolt and the Hanukkah story that happened there, but it's using those words, the abomination of desolation, which Jesus tells us is yet future. He tells us, go back and read Daniel and make sure you understand it. So clearly this is a good description also of the Antichrist. And the wise among the people shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame and captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help, and many shall join themselves to them with flattery, and some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, made white until the time of the end, for it awaits the appointed time. This is exactly what's going on according to Jesus, where he says that many will fall away, many will betray each other. Paul tells us in 2 Thessalonians 2 that two things have to happen before the day of the Lord, an apostasy and then also the man of sin being revealed. It's all right here in Daniel that there will be this apostasy. But it says those who know their God shall be strong. They shall do exploits. The wise will shine. They'll make many people understand. So that's a big reason why we're doing what we're doing in Finish Faithful, so that we're ready. Not that we're already among the wise, because that would be thinking too highly of ourselves and not having that humility of Daniel that we need to learn more from God and receive greater understanding. But we do want to have that humility. We want to have that desire to be among the wise, to be among those who know their God, if we are the ones who live to face these days. And now this section starting in verse 36 through 39, just picture this as a pretty detailed description of how the Antichrist will operate. I won't have much to say about it. We'll just let it speak for itself. And the king shall do as he wills. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and he shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation is accomplished, for what is decreed shall be done. He shall pay no attention to the God of his fathers, or to the one beloved by women. He shall not pay attention to any other god, but for he shall magnify himself above all. He shall honor the God of fortresses instead of these. A God whom his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and costly gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over many and divide the land for a price. Presumably he's talking about the land of Israel. Go down to verse 41. He shall come into the glorious land, and tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand. Edom, Moab, and the main part of the Ammonites. This is a pretty good description of the country of Jordan, the ancient land of Edom, Moab, and the Ammonites. And he shall stretch out his hand against the countries. The land of Egypt shall not escape. Egypt won't be wanting to go along with this, but they'll be forced to. He shall become a ruler of the treasures of gold and of silver, and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow his train. They're named in Ezekiel 38 as among the nations that will be in the confederacy of Gog, G-O-G, who's another name for the Antichrist there. He shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious mountain, and he shall come to his end with none to help him. So his headquarters will be between the glorious mountain, Mount Zion, Jerusalem, and the sea. That's right about where the main airport in Israel, Ben Gurion Airport, is. It's a tremendously strategic area. A good question is, where will the U.S. be in all of this? Why wouldn't we intervene to stop this? Well, of course, the Bible doesn't mention the USA, and I don't really know the answer, but I could certainly see that the first four seals will be a time of global economic catastrophe and collapse. And so maybe the U.S. won't be in a position to get involved. Or maybe the U.S. will have been so infected with the anti-Semitism over the controversy of Jerusalem that it'll be on the wrong side of that issue. So we don't know how the U.S. will or will not be involved here, and we don't really know about the power that the Antichrist, this Islamic Mahdi figure, who I believe he will be, we don't know what power he will have in the United States. But clearly he'll be very influential all over the world through his deceit and flatteries and his supernatural powers of Satan. Let's go to chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. At that time shall arise Michael, the great prince who has charge of all your people. See, there's Michael again. I think it's a very good case that he is the restrainer. He's the one who is the protector, the one who has charge of Israel. So when 2 Thessalonians says, you already know what is restraining the Antichrist from appearing until his appointed time. You already know that, Thessalonians. I think the reason they already know it is because they know the role of Michael in the end times. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never been since there was a nation till that time. That's exactly what Jesus says. He says the great tribulation will be the greatest ever known. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. God has a plan to deliver the remnant of Israel at that time. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. These are considered the most explicit verses in the Old Testament about resurrection. Remember, the Sadducees didn't believe in an afterlife. They didn't believe in resurrection because there really aren't many verses that say it, but these verses explicitly do say it. And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Think of this as compared with what it says about resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15. It really fits very well. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. So, in other words, the prophecies are in some sense sealed. Until Israel was a nation again, it was really hard to picture any of this coming to pass. Now we're in a position to see the stage being set with a Middle East coalition really ready to arise at virtually any time and come in and overwhelm Israel. But still, some parts are sealed to us. We can understand some things, but not others. And it will become more and more understood as we get to the time of the end. You know, a lot of people say this, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. They say, oh, well, look at all the travel. You can get on a jet. You can go anywhere. More people going to and fro. Look at knowledge is increasing in modern times. But what I've heard others teach, and this makes a lot of sense to me, is that many shall run to and fro over these prophecies, like we're doing. We're studying this. We're going to and fro over it. And knowledge of the end times is increasing, and it'll continue to increase as it gets closer and closer. We'll pick up some other verses, 6 and 7, and then 11 and 12. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the stream, raise his right hand and his left hand toward heaven, and swore by him who lives forever that it will be for a time, times half a time. Do you think he's kidding? I think if a heavenly being raises both hands and swears by him who lives forever, he's probably very serious about what he's saying. And that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. So in God's plan, he's going to shatter the earthly power of Israel, which is quite a great earthly power right now. It's one of the strongest in the region. But their power will be utterly gone. It'll be utterly inadequate for what they'll face, and it will have to be God who delivers them. And from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Now it says 1,290 days, and that's 30 days more than 1,260 days, right? Which is 42 months, do the math. And then it says, blessed who he awaits and arrives at the 1,335 days, which is an additional 45 days over that. I have to say, I don't really know what the extra 30 days and the extra 45 days, most of what I read indicates that it's a time of purification, certain things that have to happen in setting up the kingdom. But we can certainly understand that when that signal flare of the abomination of desolation goes off, it's just about 3.5 years until the millennial kingdom is set up, and the rapture occurs even sooner than that, because we're raptured after the 6th seal before the 7th seal. Going down to verses 9 and 10 and then 13, he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many shall purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined, but the wicked shall act wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but those who are wise shall understand. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest and stand at your allotted place at the end of days. Thank God for Daniel. He'll certainly stand in a very exalted place. His holy devotion has done so much for our understanding, and his example is so wonderful. I hope you feel like you're learning a great deal in Finish Faithful that will help us to be those who are among the wise, to be those who can have the courage to face these days. And we will need to stay pure. Purification, holiness is the message again and again in all parts of the Bible when it comes to the last days. So we will be refined by these as we go through the end times so that we can be among the wise and we can finish faithful.